Good evening, everybody. I hope everybody's doing well. We're going to give it another minute or so before we start with the presentation for the Northeast Sportsperson's Caucus. So hang with us. We'll be right with you. Everybody, I hope everybody's doing well. We're going to give it Well, let's get started. I want to welcome everyone. I'm Mark Leslie, the Northeast Region Manager, and I'm glad to see you all here tonight. Welcome to anyone watching on YouTube. 2020 certainly was a challenging year, but I was encouraged to see how many people were still able to enjoy and find solace in the outdoors. Our sincere hope is that in 2021, we'll be safe enough to return in person to meetings and that allow for more interaction. Until then, we're continuing to press on and use virtual technology for the best of our abilities, so that we really appreciate that you take time out of your evening to be with us tonight. It's an important part and process for Colorado Parks and Wildlife. We're here tonight for the Northeast Sportsperson Caucus. This is part of the statewide Sportspersons Roundtable, the purpose of which is to foster information sharing between the hunting, angling, and trapping community and the agency on issues that pertain to wildlife recreation and management in Colorado. The intent is to facilitate open, frank, and respectful dialogue between Colorado Parks and Wildlife and sportsmen and women, recognizing that sharing information in the early stages of decision-making can help identify common priorities, cultivate agreement, and surface areas of potential conflict. I want to welcome some folks on the screen tonight. We have three members of the statewide Sportspersons Roundtable here tonight. We have Cassie Smith and Brian Soliday, and they are elected delegates representing the region. They were elected at the last caucus in October, each for a 2-year term. And we also have Emily Orbanek, who is a statewide appointed delegate. We will post a link to the Sportspersons Roundtable webpage in the chat if you're interested in learning more. And thank you to Brian, Cassie, and Emily for being here tonight and for providing topics for our agenda. This is really your meeting and our opportunity to interface with the members of the public. There's a follow-up meeting, the statewide Sportspersons Roundtable, which will be held on March 1st and 2nd virtually. There are also several staff members here tonight that I'd like to recognize that will be presenting and available to answer questions. With us, we have Jason Clay, our Northeast Region Public Information Officer. We have Scott Roush, a Northeast Deputy Regional Manager. Kristen Cannon, another Northeast Deputy Regional Manager. Shannon Schaller, our Northeast Senior Terrestrial Biologist. Jeff Spohn is our Northeast Senior Aquatic Biologist. Todd Schmidt is the Area Wildlife Manager based out of Brush. Mark Lamb, the Area Wildlife Manager based in Evergreen and South Park. Matt Martinez is the Area Wildlife Manager in the Denver metro area. Jason Surface, the Area Wildlife Manager in Fort Collins. Jason Deach, Area Wildlife Manager in Loveland. We also have Jody Kennedy, who's our Policy and Planning Specialist, and Pepper Canterbury, our Northeast Hunting and Angling Outreach Coordinator. I'd like to bring your attention to the agenda that is on your screen, and these topics were suggested by our delegates and will be addressed by staff. We'll try to leave plenty of time for questions for each topic. If you have a question, we ask that you type it in the question box. And if we don't get it answered tonight, someone will reach out back to you in the coming days to make sure your question gets answered. There will also be time at the end to ask questions about topics not covered tonight or to provide comments to the delegates who will be attending the statewide roundtable in March. A recording of this meeting will be available on YouTube. Well, with that, I'd like to get started and ask Shannon Schaller to start us off with a quick discussion about what's taking up her time these days, counting deer and elk and modeling populations. Shannon, take it away.
Thank you, Mark. And you are correct that we are right in the middle of doing a lot of our counting of deer and elk herds. And this is the time of year when we are monitoring our populations so that we can start looking at big game population estimates and then turning the corner into license recommendations. So the winter is the time when CPW gets busy with staff flying in helicopters and fixed wings, and we're flying over deer and elk herds. And what we're doing is collecting data on the different compositions of these herds. So we're counting the number of young animals in herds, the number of female animals, and the number of males in the herds. And we use that data to help us understand how those populations are performing. And winter is the best time for us to do that because that's when animals are concentrated on winter range. And like I said, we do that with both fixed wing and helicopter inventory. So right now we're still finishing up some of those collection points of data. I guess also in addition to aerial inventory, we do a lot of ground surveys. We're not able to capture all of that data in the air, so we do a bunch of ground surveys, which takes a lot of effort from CPW staff. But we use those data points to then sit down and analyze the data and look at population models so that when it comes time in March for us to get together as field staff and talk about license allocation, we have an understanding of how our herds are performing and then where we're at within our objective ranges. And just a little bit on those population models. They're just one piece of the puzzle that we use to really understanding how we should do these annual license settings. And our population models they're an Excel spreadsheet where we analyze data from those flights, and then we run an analysis, and they give us estimates of populations. And along with those estimates of populations, we consider other biological factors, things such as fires and floods and other environmental factors that way. A part of what we consider when we're evaluating these populations in March and then transcending into our license allocation, we take into account a lot of the social considerations for all of our herds. So if you can imagine, it's a room full of field staff where we pull the data out that we're collecting right now and that we've analyzed now, and we sit down as a group, and field staff and DWMs give input on what's going on with game damage, how access is going, do we have concerns from hunters about crowding, are we getting feedback from hunters on either good things going out on the landscape. And we take all of those considerations along with the motive to work toward our objectives. And that's ultimately how we get to our annual license allocation. And that sounds really easy, but it's several months of a lot of data and a lot of discussions. And I might sound a little biased, but I think it's one of the most important things that we do as an agency, because ultimately this data analysis and these discussions and looking at our herds and where we're at within objectives, those ultimately transcend into our license numbers, which, as everybody knows, is a big part of this agency and our funding sources. You know, with that in mind, I guess I just wanted to speak to a little bit about that whole process. And it's probably important for everyone to know, like, there's some key pieces in there. So when I said population estimates, I think it's important for everyone to know that for every herd in the state, you know, our desire is to have as much data as we can to inform license allocation. And in some herds, we're able to do a lot of flights, and we might have radio collars on those animals, and we have a lot of data points to help us really guide where we think those population estimates are. But not every herd we have all of that data. And so again, these are just estimates that we use to guide our license allocation. But one of the encouraging things that we have going on in the Northeast region is this just this past week, we were able to deploy over 80 elk collars in the region and 40 mule deer collars and several bighorn sheep collars, and putting GPS collars on animals and then having the ability to find them and track them or to guide our flights in the direction of the groups of animals are really what help us strengthen our confidence in our population estimates. So we're pretty excited about having the ability to track those animals. You know, each year as a group, we're talking about different challenges that we have in getting data and our population estimates. And one of those challenges in the Northeast region is access to huntable lands. You know, we continually work through the challenges of gaining access on either private lands or lands owned by counties or other municipalities. And one thing you'll see from us in this region is we get a little creative and we think outside the box as it relates to issue papers and hunt code management. And really that is an attempt for us to best achieve our goals of working within our population objectives and achieve and overcome some of these challenges that we have of distribution of animals and achieving our objectives. So hopefully that just kind of gives you an idea of what we're doing as we monitor populations and what goes into these population estimates and our considerations for license allocation. And I was able to kind of get a quick sneak peek of the status of our herds in the state from the other senior biologists across the state. And of course, we're not done analyzing our data, but just wanted to pass on, at least in the Northeast region, just a quick summary of what we're seeing is that we did have drought-like conditions in the region this year. And so our fawn numbers and our calf numbers and also our male to female numbers are more in line with the statewide average. We were kind of living on the high horse there for a while with a lot of good moisture years and cranking out a lot of does, and our calf ratios were looking good, but we came down to normalcy, I'll say, a little bit across the region, and it's probably due to drought and maybe other factors, but we're very much in line with previous statewide averages. In the Northwest region, they were impacted by things such as fires as well, but the word on the street over there is most of their herds are looking like they're very much on their averages from the last 3 to 5 years, so good news on the west slope. And then in the Southwest region, if you followed much down there, they've been having recruitment issues with their elk for a while, and that's pretty much status quo, you know, still in the 20s and 30s, but their deer are looking good. In the Southeast region, they're expecting a little lower numbers potentially on their recruitment, and again, due to drought conditions. So I just want to thank everyone for your time and being here. And I hope that kind of gives you an idea of what we're up to right now as it relates to getting ready for license setting and what we consider in advance of that. And then also what we've seen, you know, in our aerial inventory up in, you know, the last month that we've been flying or so. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Shannon. Does anybody have questions related to what Shannon just discussed or about licenses? Steve, I see your question, and if I will leave this on there and hope to answer it maybe towards the end of the meeting, if that's okay, or we can chat offline or get this to the commissioners. But is there any other questions for Shannon about herd counts and population modeling and license setting? Give you a minute to type. Okay, well, we can always circle back. So please, if you think of something later, go ahead and type it in there. And so I'm gonna turn it over then to Pepper for our next agenda item. Is she's gonna talk about some youth hunting opportunities we have here in the Northeast region. Oh, hold on. Okay, nope, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Kristen.
Sure.
Hi, my name is Pepper Canterbury. As Kristen said, I'm the Northeast Region Hunting and Angling Outreach Coordinator. I'm going to share my screen with you today, and we'll do a little bit of a presentation. because there's quite a bit of information that we have. And just know that a lot of our programs are statewide programs. They're not just specific to the Northeast region, but we do have a couple of little gems in our region that we really like to have around. So I'm going to share my screen here real quick. And does everybody see that? Are we good?
Yep.
All right. So, sorry, do you guys see my pictures over here?
Nope, we just see your presentation.
Okay, great.
Yep.
So Colorado Parks and Wildlife has a number of opportunities for youth across the state, not just hunting itself, but just kind of some of the laws, rules, and regulations that we have associated with youth hunting and the opportunities we provide. I'm one of 5 coordinators across the state. We have one in each region, and then we have a statewide coordinator who's Brian Postumus, who you may have seen present to you before. He used to be in the Northeast region. So just for your information, the information I'm going to share with you tonight is all available on our website on the Hunter Outreach page. So if I'm going through and I go through a little bit too fast, or there's a little too much information, know that you can always go to our website and check out the Hunter Outreach page, and you can get all of the information there. So first of all, as far as just youth hunting in general, we have a definition for youth, and that's any person under the age of 18. They have to be under the age of 18 when they purchase a license. If they have a birthday after that fact and their license is still valid, they can still use that license for the year. They're required to have a hunter education card or an apprentice license. And for big game, they must be at least 12 years old or older to hunt. The apprentice certificate, if you've never heard about it, it's new for the last couple of years. It's available when they're at age 10. And because of COVID issues, they can have one for the maximum of 2 years. This allows them to go out and hunt without the hunter education class, but they must be accompanied by a mentor who's at least 18 years old and who possesses a hunter education card. The first real great program we have is that we have reduced license fees for all youth. The fishing licenses, they don't even need to have until they're 16 years old. And then even then they have a reduced rate for those licenses. They can also get small game, turkey, and big game licenses at a drastically reduced rate than the adult licenses. The waterfowl stamps and the federal duck stamps are not required for anyone under 16 years old. And the habitat stamp is also exempt under 16 years old. So there's plenty of opportunities at a really reduced rate for youth to get out there and hunt all the species they can possibly want to hunt. Another program we have is the youth draw preference. Shannon Schaller talked about our allocations, our license allocations. And when they come up with those numbers for each hunt unit, automatically off the top 15% of those licenses are allocated towards youth applicants only. If the number of youth applicants does not meet or exceed that 15%, then the remaining licenses will go back into the regular draw for adult licenses so that they're not just thrown away. There are a few specific units that actually allow up for 50% allocation towards youth. So that's a really great program. They don't have to compete with all of the adults across the state and across the nation in order to get licenses for their unit. Another great opportunity we have is for waterfowl hunting. There's an early season waterfowl hunt for youth specifically that typically occurs the weekend before the beginning of a regular waterfowl season. So if waterfowl season begins November 1st, then the youth season will actually be the weekend prior to that. Hunters must be youth and they must be accompanied by a mentor, but the mentors themselves cannot hunt. And this is really nice because it allows the youth hunters to get out there and not have to compete, especially on the front range, with all of the adult hunters that are out there for our limited number of open state wildlife areas and public land that's available to hunt on. They really get that weekend just to themselves, and they really do take advantage of it. The other great part of it with small game and fishing licenses is that they can adhere to the regular bag and possession limits that adults adhere to. There's no special bag and possession limits for youth. Another great program is our big game late season program. So this is kind of a convoluted, difficult program to explain and to understand sometimes. So I'm just going to give you an example of it. If a youth hunter purchases a limited antlerless license, so say a limited deer tag in Unit 8, and that's for first season, and they do not harvest their deer in that first season, then they have the opportunity to continue to hunt through the second, third, fourth, and any December seasons that we have available in that unit and the associated units with it. This applies to deer, elk, and pronghorn, and an antlerless only or either sex. So if it's an either sex tag that the youth has, they can take it to a CPW office, get it converted into a doe or a cow tag, and then they can continue to hunt on that tag. They don't just have the opportunity to hunt in that specific unit. Here's a map that they would be valid to hunt in. So if they had a Unit 8 tag, they can actually hunt all of those late seasons in Unit 7, 8, 19, 191, and 9. So if you look at the color coordinations groups on the map, those are all of the units that youth would be able to hunt in with that one tag. So it's a really great opportunity for youth that are going to school. Maybe they're in sports as well. They can't get free on the weekends, but maybe possibly they don't fill their tag. They can hunt during the Christmas break. They can hunt during Thanksgiving break and any other breaks in between. So it really provides that extended opportunity for them to get out there. Another program we have are the youth only state wildlife areas. There's multiple areas within the state, but in the Northeast region specifically, we have 2 state wildlife areas that are dedicated strictly to youth hunting. The White Horse State Wildlife Area is in Adams County, and it's open for waterfowl hunting. Our program provides the blinds as well as the goose decoys for these youth to go out on a mentored hunt. They're not mentored by our volunteers, but by their family members or their sponsors. They're required to register for this state wildlife area. So it's a limited access state wildlife area, but it's a really excellent spot near Bar Lake for folks to go and get their youth out. The Sand Draw State Wildlife Area in Sedgwick County is also a youth only state wildlife area. And it's available for deer, turkey, and a variety of small game species to hunt. And that's kind of just, they can come and they go. There's no registration required. The Wellington State Wildlife Area is not a youth only state wildlife area. However, it has been dedicated towards the effort of youth hunter outreach and novice hunter outreach. We have a range up there that's often used for hunter education classes and clinics and seminars. We do weed and shoot clinics up there. We do a novice pheasant hunter program up there. And so it's a really great state wildlife area that's close to the Front Range that we can use as an agency to teach folks how to get out and hunt the right way. The Maine Youth Outreach Program is a really great program. It's kind of the gem of CPW. It was begun in around 2002 by a gentleman named Jim Bolger, and he's kind of become the icon of youth hunter outreach. And his dream and vision was to be able to get kids out, give them opportunities to have mentored hunts by CPW staff and or certified hunt master volunteers, and really teach them the hunting ethics, the education, the safety, the tactics, and have a really great influence on them before they get out as adult hunters. So within this program, it's available for deer, elk, pronghorn, and turkey. they're mentored hunts that are structured for specific dates, and there are licenses allocated for these specific hunts that do not go into the regular allocation process. These licenses are distributed according to the specific hunt dates, the species, and the sex of that hunt. All of the hunts are mentored, and the students are focused on education and safety of the hunt and hunting in general. They go through field dressing clinics, they talk about habitat and wildlife management, all of the hunting techniques, and then even down to hunting and camp ethics. So it's a really extensive program. We do it across the state. We put through, multiple youth every year, and a lot of times they try to come back and they can hunt multiple species. They can hunt each species once, but they can also do deer, elk, pronghorn, and turkey. So they could actually potentially hunt either 4 hunts in 1 year or 4 years in a row. The selection process is going through an application, which for turkey opened up in January 1st, and then big game, small game, and waterfowl, they open up in the spring. So they apply online on our website. And then once we get all of the applications in, we go through and rank them according to how novice they really are. So if they are a novice that has a parent that hunts regularly, has harvested many animals, and can get that youth out there on their own and teach them, they're ranked a little bit lower. But if they're a novice or youth hunter that has never hunted before and their parents don't hunt, they don't have a sponsor, they're going to be ranked highest on our list to get out onto hunts. From there, we have hunt masters that have hunts scheduled that they would like to do. And we just take the list and go down the list of names and select youth according to when they're available and what type of species they want to hunt. They have to have a sponsor hunt or attend. The sponsor is not hunting, but they have to have a sponsor or a parent attend with them. And they have to go through all of the camping and ethics and education as well. So we're not just teaching the youth, we're teaching the sponsor or the parent as well. We also have some of these tags that go to sponsors, such as the Mule Deer Foundation, Pheasants Forever, Outdoor Buddies is a big program, and then Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. There's many more across the state, but those are the ones I've dealt with specifically. We get those vouchers to those programs and they take their own youth hunters out. They still just have to fit the criteria that we hold. Really, the gem of the Northeast region is our novice pheasant hunter program. It's not offered anywhere else in the state. So it's a really great program. They must have completed a hunter education course in the past 3 years. This is for adults and for youth, but the adults have to be novice. They have to be 12 years and old. And there's a mandatory classroom session that teaches them about habitat, hunting ethics, hunting laws, hunting tactics in the classroom. And then we take them out for a half-day field exercise where they learn how to do wing shooting at the Wellington State Wildlife Area. And they learn how to work a pheasant field with a group of people, a group of strangers, and learn about safe shooting zones and, calling out a rooster versus a hen or no shot, and then how to safely and effectively get an animal once it's down. Once they go through the mandatory field sessions, they're invited to special mentored hunts throughout the entire pheasant season. So they get an opportunity to hunt with mentors through early, mid, and late pheasant season across the eastern Colorado area. And they also get a special hang tag that they are allowed access into novice-only walk-in access properties. So they're the only ones to get to access a handful of properties in the eastern Colorado, northeastern Colorado, for pheasant and small game hunting. So that's pretty much the gist of our program. I know there's a lot to it. There's a lot of little moving parts. If anybody has any questions, feel free to ask. And I hope you guys are a little more informed of what we offer.
All right, I don't see any questions in the chat for Pepper. I do believe if you want to ask a question, we can enable your microphone. So if you want to raise your hand ever to just ask a question, we can do it that way too. But all right. Well, next on our agenda, Mark Lamb is going to give us an update on state wildlife area, the passes and regulations that have been changing for that. So here we go, Mark.
Thanks, Kristen. Well, hi, everybody. Thanks for being here tonight, and want to welcome our newest caucus members, Cassie and Brian. Thanks for being willing to join the team here. So thanks, greatly appreciated. I'm just going to try to give you a Reader's Digest version of what's happening with the state access into the state wildlife areas. And actually, the discussion started more than 4 or 5 years ago amongst the area wildlife managers or the supervisors. And when we started realizing that there were definite issues with almost too many people recreating on the state wildlife areas and impacting wildlife. And so this discussion has been going on for actually quite a long time internally. And trust me, we've had many, many, many discussions about this. And more importantly, how do we fix it? How do we solve it? So then in about 2000, Kristen, if you would go to the next slide, that'd be great. So then finally, we were lucky enough, the regional managers convened a working group, AWM, which is the Area Wildlife Managers Working Group. And at the time, regional manager Brett Ackerman was leading the charge with us on how do we try to resolve these conflicts? How do we try to resolve our wildlife management and continue recreation, different types of recreation than we were used to on wildlife areas. And the three things that we really looked at were we looked at all 350 wildlife areas, which was quite a task, but we were looking at what is the purpose of the wildlife area? What are the intended uses for that wildlife area? What are the conflicts? And then we started trying to compare that with the regulations that were currently in those wildlife areas, and some had special regs, some didn't. So it really varied. It was really a case-by-case basis, and that's what became so important at looking at these wildlife areas. And then we started looking at, well, do we need to change any of the regulations to make things work, to make things fit? So as this went on, the discussion came through that maybe the best way to start was to try to come up with a way to help fund with operations and maintenance on these wildlife areas. And I want to apologize up front. I have 2 Jack Russells that live at the house here, and anytime I'm on Zoom, they think they have to be here. So if you see a Jack Russell come running by, I apologize. But anyway, so the idea was, well, maybe we need to come up with a way to, and there goes one now, come up with a way to help with the maintenance and operations. So the idea was presented to the Wildlife Commission about if anyone wanted to use a wildlife area, they would have to purchase a hunting or fishing license. And after much discussion and trying to figure things out, that was actually approved in April of 2020. And so the requirement would start July 1st. And so as of July 1st, 2020, anyone who entered a state wildlife area had to have a hunting and fishing license, hunting or fishing license. Needless to say, we got some kickback and we had some resistance that some of it we didn't anticipate, but it was opened our eyes that, hey, there are a lot of other people out there that are using wildlife areas for different reasons. And they really weren't happy with having to buy a hunting or fishing license because they didn't fit in that mold. And so that opened our eyes that, well, we need to start looking at these other uses and how do they play into uses on the wildlife area. So we were actually able to come up with some check boxes when someone bought a license. So if they weren't a hunter, they weren't a fisher person, that we could realize that, okay, this person's using a wildlife area for birding, hiking, or whatever. So we started collecting that data. As we started collecting that, Director Prenslow came up with an idea of starting an external working group. And so he came up with 15 organizations There were three Parks and Wildlife Commissioners that volunteered to be on this working group. Assistant Director Lauren Truitt, and then Regional Manager JT Romatsky took over for Brett Ackerman. And then I either drew the short straw or I was lucky enough to be on it. And so I was the area wildlife manager representative. And so the agency hired an outside consultant, a facilitator, and we had two full participant workshops. And after the first workshop, it was pretty obvious that we weren't getting the information that we wanted because it was just too big. So we wound up breaking into three smaller groups, and we were able to have a little better, more frank discussion with two small group meetings. Each small group had a commissioner and then one of the CPW staff members that tried to facilitate it. And it was pretty interesting because the big thing on that was that when we would come back and compare notes from each group kind of came up with the same ideas and the same suggestions. So it was pretty interesting to see three different groups and everybody in different organizations all came back with kind of the same idea. The information was presented to the commission in January of this year. So there was much discussion, and it is up for final adoption at the commission meeting in March of 2021. Kristen, if you could hit that next slide, that would be great. So the new pass, as it's called, it's not a license, it's a pass. And the pass is called the Colorado State Wildlife Area Pass. And there was actually a lot of discussion just on the name itself. There was also a lot of discussion of, hey, are you putting the cart in front of the horse? Shouldn't we be discussing what activities are allowed on a wildlife area before you start getting a pass, so people will figure out, is that good or should I get one or not? And the madness to the method on doing the pass first was trying to get it into our system so it would coordinate with all the other licenses that go into effect on April 1st. And so that was kind of the idea, was to try to time it with all our other licenses. The price of the license, as you can see, is $46.75. We tried to equate it with the cost of one of our licenses, kind of having some equity among users. And that was a annual fishing license of $35. Since it's wildlife areas, the consensus was to include the $10 habitat stamp charge, as well as the 25-cent search and rescue charge, and the $1.50 Wildlife Council, the education charge. So that was all added in for a charge of $46.75 is the suggested price of this pass, an annual pass. We started talking about the different conditions. And so 16 and under, or under 16 is free. We've discussed trying to keep these other types of products in line with products that we currently have. So the senior rate would be consistent with other CPW passes, as well as the low income. And that's a Jack Russell moving my computer, I apologize. And then during the commission meeting, it was suggested that maybe we ought to look at some possible veterans and military options for to come into this discussion. So that's under some discussions right now. The time frame was either an annual pass or a daily pass. And the cost of the daily pass would be $8 or $9. Once again, trying to keep in line with all our other passes that we have. So everything was pretty consistent with other products that we have. And then the big discussion is the property activity considerations. And this is where this was, I don't want to call it a rabbit hole, but this is one of the topics that came up at every workshop and every small group meeting on what was going to be allowed on wildlife areas. Kristen, if you could hit the next slide, please. Everybody agreed that wildlife areas need to be, the things to consider is they need to be for wildlife, they need to be for wildlife habitat, and hunting and fishing recreation. Those were the three main priorities for wildlife areas. And those were the three main guiding principles that we were using to say, this is the purpose of the wildlife areas. This has to be the primary use of these. Those other uses, whether it's stand-up paddle boards, it's hiking, it's birding, those secondary activities, as long as they don't interfere with those primary intended purposes, would probably be okay. So phase 2 of this working group, or phase 2 of this project, is to come up with ideas of what is going to be allowed, what is going to not interfere with the intended purposes of these wildlife areas. The benefit of this is that people were pulling their hair out on different topics, but it really opens the door to education, not just on the state wildlife area, but just on wildlife management, wildlife conservation. It's really going to be a really good, positive way for us to get the message out on what we do. The other big important thing is it's also going to provide us with information on users. So we're going to be able to hopefully gather information, especially on the people buying this pass, on why are they using wildlife areas? Are they using it for those other activities I mentioned before? Or is there something else out there that we're not aware of that's going to help us with trying to manage wildlife areas for wildlife? One of the things I forgot to mention in the start was this is a work in progress. And I think Commissioner McDaniel, or McDaniel, I spelled his name wrong. Yeah, good. Was that he said this is an evolutionary process, and that's exactly right. This is not going to be, hey, we're done. We're going to work through the process, and if something comes up where we need to change it, we're going to change it. In a nutshell, there was a lot of time and a lot of conversations on what's happening with the state wildlife areas. And Kristen, last slide. So thank you. And there's my mule who's in the back of me too. Everyone loves Phyllis. So any questions?
There is a question or a comment from Steve. And again, if anybody wants to raise their hand, you're welcome to ask these questions live or provide your comments live. But Steve says, just a comment, not a question. He lives next door to Bodecker State paddleboarding area, and he believes this area is leased land state wildlife area. As a fisherman, there's no place to park because the area is constantly full of paddleboarders. With the new proposed pass, CPW loses out on DJPR, on Dingle, or on the Pittman-Robertson dollars. The area was acquired for fishing and waterfowl years ago. Paddleboarders can go to Boyd, Carter, or other ample reservoirs. It would be great to see the paddleboarders decline slightly so anglers can angle. Mark, do you have any thoughts on this, or Jason Deach, do you have anything to add?
Jason, I'll jump in quick and then you can gladly follow up. But Steve, exactly one of the conflicts that we were seeing and trying to deal with. We see that Bodecker isn't the only place where that's happening. That's happening in I won't say numerous, but several wildlife areas where other types of recreation have come in and impacted the use. And it was kind of interesting. I actually had a stand-up paddleboarder call me and say, is it okay to do this at this state wildlife area? It's not illegal. And so as we talked about it, he said, well, we're very cognizant of the fishermen. We try to put in away from the fishermen. We stay away so we don't go over their lines, because that's one of the big things. And he says, so we don't have any impact. And the guy was super great, but I said to him, you do have an impact, because where you and your 4 friends park, now fishermen can't park there. So we're aware of that, Steve. And that's one of the things in phase 2 we're hoping to try to figure out. Some wildlife areas might be conducive to stand-up paddleboards. Some may not be. So that's one of the things we're going to try to start looking at is the intended use, right? Wildlife is number 1, wildlife management is 2, and then hunting and fishing recreation number 3. Those are the main bases, guiding principles that we're working on. And then we'll look at those other uses and are they compatible? Are they compatible at a certain time of the year or not? So those are things we're working on, and we're hoping we'll get there. So, but thanks for the I guess comment.
Mark, can you also speak to the Pittman-Robertson dollars and how that played into the process of developing this pass?
Sure, yeah, you bet. So our funding is matched a lot of times with federal dollars, and Pittman-Robertson dollars are monies that come from the sale of ammo and firearms, and Dingle Johnson are from the sale of fishing equipment. And so we match that money. And so it's very important that when we have these wildlife areas and we're using those federal dollars for matching for operations and maintenance, that we're meeting the intended uses of those wildlife areas or agreements we have with the feds. So if we purchase a property with Dingle Johnson or PR funds, we have to use those for fishing or hunting. And these other recreational activities can actually impact next year's funding or down the road funding. So it's a pretty important aspect of this whole project that we need to make sure we're following the legal requirements of why we have some of these properties. And it might be that down the road, maybe I can see Todd Schmidt on my screen here, and maybe the Todd Schmidt State Wildlife Area, which really doesn't have any wildlife anymore, and it's really been not that primary purpose anymore. It could be that we try to find a cooperating agency or government agency to say, hey, can you take this over and we'll trade it, we'll sell it, whatever. So that possibility with real estate actions are there too on properties if they're not meeting the intended purposes of why they were originally acquired. That help? Long-winded, I'm sorry.
No, that was great.
Could I jump in there as well?
You bet.
You know, Steve and Mark both hit on something that is, I think, very critical, and the public is obviously seeing the impacts to our parks and our wildlife areas, and it's a balancing act that the agency has to do with CPW on our badges and our patches that we work for with outdoor recreationists and with hunters and anglers and others that want to enjoy those properties. So especially here in the Northeast region, if you look at some of the visitation numbers for our parks and those that we have numbers on our state wildlife areas, we're seeing astronomical increases in recreation of all kinds on our properties. And so, you know, we have a responsibility to maintain those properties at a high level if we can. And we're going to have to employ different strategies to deal with different situations. And the Bodecker situation, Steve, I've been out there. I was out there this summer, and you're absolutely right. Paddleboard heaven out there. And we recently just renewed that lease on Bodecker. And so we're entering into another lease for fishing access. And it's obviously still open for other opportunities as well right now. But the commission and the division will be looking at regulation changes on properties that state wildlife area properties that we may be piecing and parting some different regulations and different strategies for different properties. There may be some properties that we can allow that type of activity on, and some properties that we prefer not. And oftentimes with the increase in water sports that we saw this year on our parks and our wildlife areas, people went out and bought paddle boards and went out and tried this for the first time, or they may be novice at it. We saw a lot of increase. I'm wondering if there's going to be a lot of paddle boards for sale on Craigslist, that are in still pretty good shape this next summer. So keep your eye open for that.
Great.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Mark.
And I can't emphasize, this is a work in progress. So I know the commissioners, this is on their radar to get it and try to get it going in the right direction. So it's there'll be probably some hiccups along the way, but we're going to try to work through it. And just remember that the wildlife areas are for wildlife, and that's kind of the key. So anyway, thanks for your time, folks. Appreciate it.
We got a couple more questions for you, Mark.
Okay, great.
Can't get off that easy.
That's okay. That's good.
So we've got a question. Will this be an additional cost on top of all the other costs that Colorado public land hunters already pay?
No. So if you have a current fishing license or a hunting license of any kind, that is your access onto a state wildlife area. So no additional charges. This new pass, as it's called, it's not a license, it's a pass. And the whole idea of a pass is it opens the door to more people being able to acquire it, which does create a conundrum of, well, are you going to have more people? But we're also trying to be fair to folks that can use wildlife areas. So, but nothing new to anyone who's purchased a hunting a current hunting license, a valid hunting license for that year.
So the pass and the license are an either or, right? You either need a hunting license or the pass to access state wildlife areas, or a fishing license.
Correct, 100% correct.
Great. We have a question, just wondering, is there any way as a trapper we are allowed to trap on these properties?
It would depend on the property. The hunting or fishing license, needless to say, once again, is what would be needed to get on the wildlife area.
So there's specific property rules for state wildlife areas that might dictate that somewhat, but for the most part, it's allowed on state wildlife areas.
Correct.
The caveat there is that live trapping,
Right.
Correct.
cage trapping, because leg hole trapping was significantly restricted many years ago by Amendment 14. And so leg hole trapping can only take place under certain conditions on private property.
Yeah. Great. And glad to see him on the meeting. And he just says, glad to hear of this program. And he feels hunters and fishermen sometimes feel they are paying while others enjoy similar benefits free. So I think
that was a very important topic that came up frequently in both the workshops and the small groups, that the properties were acquired by hunting and fishing dollars and some federal aid dollars. So we need to kind of remember who actually put the money up to pay for those properties, which was critical in the acquisition in the beginning, which is pretty important. So that's a very good point.
And I'd like to thank Mark for his participation on this group. I mean, Mark has nearly 35 years of experience, started with Division of Wildlife, and he's a great asset to be on this group and look at these issues. He's got South Park, Terriall, all those areas down in South Park that he gets to deal with. So I really appreciate his work on the group. So thanks, Mark.
Great. Okay, well, we will let Mark off the hook for a little bit and let Todd take over, and he's going to just take a few minutes to discuss some of the waterfowl hunting opportunities we have here in the Northeast.
Thanks so much, Kristen. Good evening, everybody. It's great to see so many people a part of the conversation tonight. My name is Todd Schmidt. I'm the Area Wildlife Manager out of Brush. And as Kristen said, I'd just like to talk a little bit about waterfowl hunting opportunities in the Northeast region. I'm sure some of you are quite aware of all the different opportunities that we have along the Front Range and out here on the Eastern Plains. But just in case you're not, I'll highlight a few of those. Probably talk at a little bit of a higher level about those opportunities, but would love to have some questions at the end and do my best to answer those. Specifically here in the Northeast region, we're a part of the Central Flyway, and our waterfowl season is split into two different portions. We have the first split. Typically season opens sometime around early to mid-October and will run through Thanksgiving and the end of November. That's our first split. And then we have a second split that starts up typically in mid-December, and then it runs generally through the end of January. With those two different splits, we tend to get two different types of waterfowl hunters. The folks who enjoy the first split typically enjoy warmer weather. They enjoy hunting over shallow wetlands, and we have many state wildlife areas that try and provide those types of opportunities. Whether it's Banner Lakes, whether it's Wellington that was talked about earlier, or out in my direction, Andrick Ponds, Brush Prairie Ponds. We have a lot of different opportunities for those shallow wetlands. Some of those are reservation properties. Typically with our reservation properties, you need to have a little bit more forethought about what and when you want to go hunting. And you can start making reservations for those up to 2 weeks out. But we also have other shallow wetland properties that are on a first come, first served basis as well. And so those are strictly, typically our properties here in the Eastern Plains open up at 4 a.m. So you can come out nice and early, pick your spot, sit and wait for your sunrise to come and enjoy your morning of waterfowl hunting. We look at those in two different ways. Typically our reservation properties, we're thinking of them as a little bit more of a quality hunt. We limit the number of people on the property. We limit at times the days of which you can hunt on those properties. versus a first come, first serve is more of just an opportunity. You might have decided the night before that you wanted to take your son out and go for a hunt, and we have properties for that. Also during that first split, if you will, we have river properties. Some people just really like to get out here and hunt along the South Platte, and we have many wildlife areas that can accommodate that opportunity as well. Then when you start thinking about the second split, right, we're really down in the heart of winter typically come mid-December and into January, and most of those shallow wetlands have frozen up, and so those opportunities aren't there anymore. And we really look at our river properties as being the place where people want to come spend some time. Sometimes we have reservoirs that might still be open. Warm winter like we're having right now, you can find some open water in certain places, but typically you're going to be looking at our rivers, typically the South Platte. I have a lot of wildlife areas down here, and I got to tell you, every weekend they are busy. People are enjoying getting out and spending some time outdoors. Part of the question tonight was also about is the Northeast region pursuing any more shallow wetlands or waterfowl hunting properties? And again, very broadly, the agency goes through a process to try and acquire properties, and we call it the habitat stamp, the RFP process. So for any of those properties where we're looking to do fee title acquisition or conservation easements, they have to go through that process that involves an application, a reviewing process at region level, and then at the statewide level, and it's a pretty rigorous process. But we do get properties, and I'm hopeful, keeping my fingers crossed, that we'll get an addition to Elliott State Wildlife Area potentially through that process here in the near future. Otherwise, we do leases. I think of like a Pruitt Reservoir, where we have a lease with the local ditch company, and we lease the rights to recreate on that body of water. And so there are a couple different ways that we can pursue properties. Some are more entailed than the others, but they're both ways for which we do pursue opportunities for our public hunting here on the Eastern Plains and in the Northeast region. So that's a pretty quick overview. I'm sure there's questions out there, and I'm looking forward to hearing them. Kristen, what do you got for me?
Trying to do things at once. I don't see any questions related to waterfowl access.
Okay. Surely I didn't do that good of a job such that nobody has any questions.
So what's the water level at all the state wildlife areas?
The river has water in it, so that's a good thing. If Mr. Lamb in South Park would get a little bit more snow, that'll be really good for us in the spring and summer. But this fall was actually quite tough. We didn't get to run water in several of our shallow wetland properties where we typically run augmentation. And that does impact, obviously, our waterfowl hunting opportunities. So that does lead to a great question. Thank you, Ms. Cannon. In this future year, we're looking at drought conditions currently. We're looking at low snowpack up in the mountains. And for me here on the Eastern Plains, that means that it's very unlikely that we'll be running augmentation this year because those water rights are junior to irrigation and they're junior to reservoir filling. And so it does impact what our water levels look like. Currently, reservoirs are filling out here on the Eastern Plains, which does take water out of the river in a significant way, but yet there's still plenty of water flowing. And so this weekend coming up is the last weekend for waterfowl season. There's going to be a lot of folks out. It's going to be a great opportunity. But when it comes to next fall and using irrigation water to feed some of our shallow wetlands, that could be a challenge for us. So great question.
Great. And we do have a question about the issue paper that came before the commission about the elimination of early goose season. Would you want to speak to that, or Mark, are you interested in talking about that?
I can speak to that one if that's all right, Todd.
You bet.
We, over the last 25 to 30 years, we've obviously seen a lot of changes in land use on the Front Range. We have had an early goose season in place to try to get at some of those resident geese that hang out in our metro areas of Fort Collins and the Denver area. And early on, it was pretty successful. We also combined that with closures on some of the reservoirs, so that that provided a refuge for those geese to stay on those reservoirs and keep them where they were available for hunters to take. And over the years, we've had open space and subdivisions and farming practices change due to actually climate, that corn is not harvested as early as it has been in the past. And so because of that, we only get a certain number of goose hunting days, waterfowl days that we can have in the season. And we were utilizing quite a few of those early days for that early season that were unproductive, really. I mean, it's a great time to get out and enjoy, waterfowl hunting while it's still, reasonably warm, as we heard at the last commission meeting from Commissioner Garcia. But we have the opportunity to put those days on the end of the season so that we can be a little more efficient and effective with our harvest on our geese population. We will still get at some of those resident geese with those later season dates. And so we had brought this issue in front of the commission last week, and they approved moving it forward for final disposition at the next meeting. So I hope if anybody has any questions about that, I'd be happy to address those as well.
Kristen, you're on mute there. Mark, it doesn't look like we have additional questions on that one. Another question that came in, with the drought on the Eastern Plains, do you anticipate a change in the deer tag allocation for the 2021 deer hunting season?
I'll speak to it a little bit. I'm sure Shannon might be able to speak more in depth about it. Right now, we still don't have our harvest numbers from this past fall, and we'll be looking at our flight data and what our ground counts look like as far as population estimates. So here this spring, we'll be looking at putting those groups of information together and discussing to determine what that license allocation will look like. As far as how the drought may or may not affect that, I'll turn that over to Ms. Schaller.
Thanks, Todd. I guess that old phrase, too close to call or too early to tell, probably applies to kind of what Todd was saying, is that, harvest is a big component of understanding where we need to go with allocation in the following years. And as you might recall, I did say the last several years we've been doing really well and, been quite productive in the region. And so, we've been trying to get toward objective. And so it's just really hard to tell, but we may see that some of the increases that we had been making over the last several years may kind of plateau, or we make some decreases here and there. But like Todd said, it really does take the full picture to understand where we're at within our objective, and using those pieces like harvest estimates, damage, distribution of animals on the landscape to really have an understanding of where we need to go for the following year to stay within objective or to get within objective.
Thank you, Todd and Shannon, and thank you, Jenny, for the question.
Okay. We had a request to share the link about the proposed state wildlife area pass in the chat box. And I found the PowerPoint. I'm going to try and find the link to the proposal in case anyone wants to submit public feedback to the commission, as they are still accepting it. So I will work on that, but in the meantime, we can move on to the next thing on the agenda. Thank you, Todd, for that. Appreciate it, and everybody else. And so now I am up. Hang on. Too many buttons. Okay. Gotta hit all those buttons. Okay, so I'm going to take about 5 minutes to talk about the Colorado Sportsperson's Access Work Group. So the Colorado Sportsperson's Access Work Group was created to explore and promote new ways for CPW to partner with landowners to try to increase public access for hunting and angling on private land. There's some similar programs in neighboring states. And of course, we have our Walk and Access program, which is similar, and Ranching for Wildlife. But we're forming this group to try to put together a kind of a novel way to maybe approach this and increase access and help with wildlife management. And so I'm just going to spend a few minutes introducing it. We're at the beginning of this. And so we're going to have plenty, hopefully, opportunity for public comment and feedback, and lots more to discuss. And so we have internal members of the work group that work for CPW, and from all pretty much all the branches that we have, all the field staff in the 4 regions. We have somebody from real estate, our private lands coordinator, public involvement and information, our walk and access coordinator, and our terrestrial programs manager. And so staff, we've been working together for over a year to put together a public stakeholder group that can inform us and kind of help guide what an access program could look like. And so on the access program, we have a couple stakeholders I saw on tonight. So thank you guys for being here and being a part of the stakeholder group. But we have representatives from all these organizations. In addition, we've got a hunter representative. We have someone who works in the energy industry and an outfitter. And as you can see, we have a lot of stakeholders. And so we're trying to make sure we have adequate representation, not only of hunters and anglers, but also of landowners being a pretty key constituency in all this. And so we want to keep it manageable. We want to be able to have discussions, but we also want to make sure everybody's at the table. And I think one thing that's brought out for us is that we're going to need to reach out to a lot more people and a lot more groups in order to get the kind of feedback we need for this program to be a success ultimately. We have 4 kind of takeaways at this point. We've had 2 stakeholder meetings. We had one in October and another one in December. We have one coming up again in February. And we've kind of heard from stakeholders, and we're all in agreement that this is a great opportunity to design a unique program that could benefit Coloradans and visitors, to provide more access for hunting and angling in places where maybe access is limited, especially. We need to talk to and get feedback from landowners and identify their needs and concerns. We heard a lot from landowners that, they want to be a part of this process and not just approached afterwards once we've got the program all settled and telling them how we're going to do things. And we need to make sure that all hunters and anglers have access through this program. So we're trying to be cognizant that, it's in our changing world. It used to be you could just go knock on a door and ask for permission. And these days I hear from landowners that they got too many people knocking on their doors. And I also hear from people in urban and suburban areas that they don't feel as comfortable doing that, and they may not feel as comfortable accessing private property. So we want to make sure that whatever access program we develop is welcoming to all hunters and anglers that want to take advantage of it, and is accessible to them, and is something that they feel comfortable taking advantage of and willing to take advantage of. So we want to make sure we get all those perspectives. And lastly, just that the stakeholders that we have involved in this process are knowledgeable and engaged. We've had a lot of discussions on not just the how, but the what and even the why on this. And so as we go forward, we're going to continue to work on this with our stakeholders. And hopefully I'll have updates for you at future meetings, and I'll have opportunities for you to participate and provide your feedback. So This is just an introduction. Wanted to take a few minutes to let you know that we're up to this and see if you had any questions I can try to answer right now. And Jason, if you can help me out with the questions, I got too many screens.
Can do. One question is, will this new program group address the issues that Commissioner Adams raised on building relationships between non-white hunters and landowners? As a budding hunter, I will never knock on the door of a private landowner that I do not know, but CPW can play a major role in connecting those specific communities.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're cognizant of it, and our stakeholders are making us aware of it as well and challenging us to get the right people at the table to make sure that whatever program is designed, that it has real tangible access for hunters and anglers, whether they're urban or suburban or people of color, that they feel comfortable taking advantage of it. So it's definitely a priority for this program, and that's something that we're focused on.
One thing that I want to mention also is that this is ancillary to many other access programs that we have in the agency. And so we just realized that there's really not a private land leasing program specifically designed for access. We have others that, that do provide access for hunting and fishing, but we feel like this is an added benefit. And it's, as Kristen mentioned, it's still a work in progress. And, there are other states like Montana and Wyoming that have very successful programs with very robust budgets and very robust staffing. And we don't have, we have an internal work group that's working on this, and many dedicated volunteers that are not paid for their participation in this group, that we feel like this is designing a program that, will probably change and morph in the next few years and give us a starting point. So this isn't a finished product, as Kristen mentioned, by any means, but we feel like it's a building block for something better to come.
Okay. Well, stop sharing.
Kristen, we do have another question that came in that we can maybe touch on too. It's a little bit off topic, but as we transition, one that maybe Shannon could help us address here. And it's just a quick question on how chronic wasting disease numbers are looking in our region.
Thanks, Jason. We didn't do mandatory sampling in the Northeast region this year. We did last year, and many times it takes mandatory sampling to get the sample sizes needed to really have the confidence in your CWD prevalence rates. So if you recall, in our CWD management plan, we do mandatory sampling 1 year and hopefully get the necessary sample size to get confidence in our estimates. Then we implement if that CWD prevalence is above 5%, we implement management strategies to reduce that prevalence. And then the plan is to retest in 5 years and see where prevalence is. Based on some of our prevalence rates in the region, some of which are at 20%, I know we'll be managing for CWD in the coming years, but the exact prevalence of some of these DAUs, I haven't seen the final numbers, but we know we'll be managing for it in the region, and then we'll retest in 5 years to see if we've been able to reduce prevalence based on some of our management strategies. And having said that, we did test South Park this last year, and our staff did a really good job of working weekends and getting out there and collecting samples and trying to make sure we had enough of a sample size to have reliable data. And from that testing, we did have 1 positive in all of that DAU. So that's great news, at least in South Park, that maintaining really low prevalence. So something we'll keep an eye on, and we'll continue to manage as if we have higher CWD rates into the future. And if Todd or any of the other AWMs or Mark want to jump in on that, please feel free to help expand on what I said.
All right, looks like we're good. Thank you, Shannon. And it looks like maybe we're at a point where we can continue moving forward. Looks like next up on our agenda, we got Jeff Spohn, who's our senior aquatic biologist for the region. He's going to give us a little bit of a fishing update.
Thanks, Jason. Yes, I'm Jeff Spohn, the senior aquatic biologist in the Platte River Basin. So we manage the Northeast region and also part of the Northwest region. Any drop of water that goes from those drainages to Nebraska are under my staff's supervision. So thank you, and I welcome everybody for being here. I don't really have a presentation or a whole lot of updates, but I will say that what I'm hearing is license sales right now are up about 100,000 versus a normal year at this point in time. And most of those license sales are new fishermen or fisher persons. So our staff is really working hard to try to manage those fisheries, you know, whether it's on a state park or a state wildlife area, you know, to just kind of manage those waters and whatnot. But it seems like from our fall sampling, where we're able to get into a bunch of those places, numbers are looking great, even though use is up. So I think a lot of things have been, you know, species have been catch and release, and not a lot of people harvesting bags. We were bag and possession limits. We're not really looking at changing regulations at this point. So I know that's been a big push from some of the outside anglers, is, you know, looking at how much pressure has been put on the resource versus, you know, bag and possession limits and whatnot. So, you know, Mark, Leslie, and the AWMs, I think we're sitting pretty good as of now with some of the data that we've been able to analyze to this point. And then just looking forward to this next year with COVID restrictions, with walleye spawn, most of my staff comes up from Fort Collins, and we are going to run one operation this year at Cherry Creek instead of Cherry Creek and Chatfield Reservoir. So we'll have a lot of commuting hours, you know, to make that operation successful, but staff is fully on board to do that. So just kind of wanted to share that with everybody and just kind of open it up to questions if people had questions or whatnot about, you know, some of our warm water fisheries that have been on the forefront of concern this year with the big angler use, and moving forward. So thanks, Jason.
Jeff, would you give us an overview of some of the water projects that we can speak about, the ones that are in process that your staff and the region staff are working on? These Northeast region has, as you can imagine, a huge number of water projects that municipalities and water providers are working on to provide municipal and other forms of water in the region. And Jeff's staff especially, and the regional staff get really involved in these long drawn out processes to look at wildlife impacts from projects and try to mitigate them. And so if you could touch on a couple of those, I would appreciate that. Thank you. I know I sprang that on you, but if you don't mind.
Yeah, not a problem, Mark. Thanks for bringing that up. Earlier this afternoon, we were on a call with Bear Creek State Park in the town of Lakewood with, you know, Jerry McKee, District Wildlife Manager Carlin Armstrong, and I, just about how to preliminarily think about what some of those mitigation issues are going to be. It sounds like they're going to, you know, put on 22,000 acre feet of water on top of what they've got there, which impacts recreation, impacts, you know, the fishing. We're trying to build in into that cake environmental pool so we can increase environmental releases downstream. We're working on, obviously, still the Chatfield reallocation project that's been on the books for about the last 10 years to do the same type of deal. And we're using that as kind of a a cookbook for Bear Creek. We spend hours and hours a week on Halligan, which is on the North Fork of the Pooter with the city of Fort Collins. They're going to put about, I think it's 6,800 acre feet of water on top of the current reservoir that expands there or exists there. So looking at downstream flows and mitigation and fish passage. We're looking at preliminary conversations with Wild Horse up in South Park, which Mark Lamb is, familiar with. It's a big draw on the agency right now, moving forward as far as, current staff levels and looking at the biological and the recreational components for all those reservoir developments, because obviously water development in Colorado, especially in the Northeast region, is huge. We need to have it happen. We just need to have it happen in a sense that's environmentally sound. So staff is really being taxed right now to make sure that we fit that recreation, environmental, and need component all together to make it work.
Thanks, Jeff. I appreciate that. I mean, one example is, when we talk about Glade Reservoir, so the inundation of, several hundred acres, a reservoir that's proposed to be, I think, a bit larger than Horsetooth Reservoir in Larimer County. And you look at the loss of terrestrial wildlife habitat and the addition of aquatic wildlife habitat. So our staff is at the drawing board with the water entities, Northern Water, City of Fort Collins, even Larimer County being involved in those processes. And then as per regulation, federal regulation, the Fish and Wildlife Mitigation Plan has to be approved by the Parks and Wildlife Commission, and that was done. And so all entities end up negotiating and operating off of an approved Fish and Wildlife Mitigation Plan for those reservoirs. So you can imagine the legal issues that are involved with that, as far as, like Jeff said, trying to maximize opportunity for recreation, make sure that terrestrial wildlife habitat issues are dealt with, migration corridor, inundation, those kinds of things. So I just kind of want to give everybody a sense of how complicated and all encompassing these, each of these projects is. It's really unbelievable, all the work that goes into them.
Yeah, and thanks for that, Mark. And I just want to make sure that everybody understands too that there's not a cookie cutter approach here. Obviously some of these water development projects will benefit aquatics. There's other things that are going to definitely impact aquatics when it comes to inundation of river habitat with naturally reproducing brown trout, rainbow trout populations, and things like that. So every one of these projects it's dynamic. It's always different, whether or not it's a Bear Creek versus a NISP or a Glade Reservoir project versus a Halligan. We're always keying into your point on staff's expertise on any one of these projects on any given day to try to make sure that we move our mission forward.
Thanks, Jeff. I appreciate that.
Jeff, we do have an additional question, and Matt Martinez, maybe you could chime in here as well, as it's out of Area 5, but this question on, will there be any plans for angling in the new Reuter Hess Reservoir in Douglas County? Seen a lot of development for homes around it, and heard there was plans to open it up for recreation. Anything you can share there?
I can field from what I know, and then maybe Matt could correct me if I'm off. But Reuter Hess at this point in time does not have the ability to sustain a fishery 365 days out of the year. And maybe Matt, you can maybe talk to the public access component of what that situation is, because I'm not familiar with that.
So thank you, Matt Martinez, Area 5, Area Wildlife Manager. So we have had discussions with Parker Water and Sanitation. And at the time of the conversations, they were opening up the reservoir a couple of days a week to certain groups to recreate, and it was mostly paddle boarding, and usually 2 to 4 hours a day, 2 times a week. They have planted fish in the reservoir, kind of various species. They, I think, are eventually going to be interested in allowing some opening it up to some angling. But at the time that we talked to them, they were, it was really like several years out. And that was, when we talked to them, it was sometime last year. So I can see that eventually they will open up to some kind of restricted angling of some sort. But I think that's further off in the future. And we're always open to talking to them and helping them out in any way we can. But our role right now, I think, is pretty minimal.
Thank you, Matt and Jeff. And getting up to 7:30 here with about a half hour to go. So I think at this time, we'll continue on to our next topic here, and we'll turn it back over to Regional Manager Mark Leslie, who will give us a wolf reintroduction and Prop 114 update.
Thanks, Jason. I'll keep this fairly high level. Obviously, wolves have been a huge topic of conversation for the last year, at least in Colorado. We had a wolf working group that was put together back in 2001, and our director Dan Prenslow was a member of that group at the time. They developed over 70 recommendations that the division would follow or work towards regarding wolves. And in 2016, the Parks and Wildlife Commission basically reaffirmed the decision to allow wolves to come in on their own, but opposing wolf reintroduction at that point. Obviously, Amendment 114, Proposition 114, was put together, and once that would propose that wolves would be restored to Colorado, and that Colorado Parks and Wildlife would develop plans to restore wolves by the end of December of 2023. And that passed by a narrow margin, as you all know, I'm sure. And so as of January 4th, we became the management agency that oversees gray wolves in Colorado. And so 2 days later, there was a lawsuit filed by several animal activist groups that questioned the U.S. Fish and Wildlife's decision to delist that species. And I should have prefaced that comment that wolves were actually proposed delisting by the Fish and Wildlife Service, and that decision went into effect January 4th. So that being said, the Parks and Wildlife Commission has a responsibility to oversee this process. And actually, the statute now says that the Parks and Wildlife Commission will be responsible for the restoration of gray wolves into Colorado. And so you can imagine the public interest in this process and the situation. I'll be honest with you, you'd think that we're not doing anything else for about the last 6 months other than managing wolves, rather than the other 960 species that we manage in this state. But it's a huge concern to everyone, and everybody's interested in it, no matter which side of the equation you want to look at. And so the division, we've been developing a plan, a draft plan for restoration and management. And the lead for our agency is Reed DeWalt, and he's the Assistant Director for Wildlife and Natural Resources for the agency. And so he's the overall lead for the wolf restoration project at CPW. And as part of the process, there will be a technical working group developed and a stakeholder advisory group developed, obviously with members of the public involved in both of those groups, as well as internal members of Colorado Parks and Wildlife involved in it. And these groups will be advisory to the Parks and Wildlife Commission on issues related to wolf management, restoration, and reintroduction. And so we're working through this process, and Reed put together a draft plan for the commission to take a look at the commission meeting last week. I'm sure many of you were involved in it. I know many commissioners that are on this call were involved in it heavily. We had a robust public discussion about folks' opinions about how this should be done, the time frame for doing it. Governor Jared Polis weighed into the process as well. So we heard from a lot of different factions and groups that are, as I mentioned, very interested in this. And the upshot of it was that the commission approved the plan and approach, and I won't get into all the details about what that looks like, the draft plan and approach to move forward with this restoration process. Obviously, there are a lot of moving parts to this process that need to be worked out. We don't have all the decisions made, and we don't have all the numbers crunched. We don't have all the details worked out. There's going to be a huge public relations component to this, and I think a lot of the people that you see on this call tonight are going to be involved in that. Obviously, each region and Reed staff are going to be involved in putting public meetings together to gather public input about the planning, the draft planning process as we move through this huge undertaking, and give feedback back to the Parks and Wildlife Commission about that. We're developing internally several teams to work on basically the subject matter expert part of the evaluation for the reintroduction that will advise the technical work group and the stakeholder advisory group and the commission and the director about possible policies and procedures to move down the road with. We'll have as I mentioned, the project lead is Reed, local communities outreach team. Obviously, that's a huge PR undertaking that we will need to work with. We have a lot of throughout the state communities that are very interested in it, not just on the West Slope. And I should have said that the 114 proposes that we restore wolves on public lands in certain areas on the West Slope in Northwest Colorado. We'll also have a damage prevention and compensation team. I'm going to be a part of that. Our lead on that team is going to be Regional Manager Corey Chick in the Southwest region. We'll have a policy and regulations team, a communication team, and a reintroduction and management team. So those teams are going to be advisory basically to the technical working group, stakeholder advisory group, as I mentioned, and the commission and the division director as we move through the process. Obviously, we don't have a firm timeline other than the December 2023 to have the plan. It says to develop the plan for reintroduction. You can read that several different ways. I don't want to get too far into the weeds on that one, but you can read it that we have to have a plan developed by December 2023 for reintroducing. And a lot of folks are reading that we need to have a plan and have the wolves reintroduced by December of 2023. Any questions about that at this point? I'll open that up on the chat for any questions.
Mark, we had one on how will members be appointed to the Wolf Advisory Group?
Those, there'll be an application process that will be looked at for applications, and the basically the composition of that group is going to be determined by the division director and the Parks and Wildlife Commission. Chairman McDaniel and the other commissioners will be weighing in on that. So that I would stay tuned for that process. We haven't developed that process quite yet, but there will be a public outreach and application process for those members. One update that I do want to give you, obviously, we do have wolves on the ground in Colorado. We've had them on the ground for a while now, and we've been we've had wolves that have crossed down through Yellowstone and can come down into Wyoming and come into Colorado. I think the earliest known migrant from the Yellowstone population was a collared female that was hit on I-70 over by Idaho Springs in, I think, 2004. And so that was the first wolf that showed up in Colorado that we could document from the reintroductions into Yellowstone. And we've had several since then. And you're probably all aware that we've had we would call it a group of wolves up in northwest Colorado and Moffett County, up in the Browns Park area, and then some reports on some other areas in the northern part of the state. We've had a collared wolf in eastern North Park that was a collar from Wyoming that came out of the Snake River Pack up in Wyoming, and that wolf that's a male that's been hanging around in that area for over a year on the eastern part of North Park, and we've had evidence that animal's been ranging over into the upper part of the Laramie River Valley, which is actually in the Northeast region, and so we're keeping tabs on that wolf. Occasionally we fly for that animal to see where he's at, but as of this point, those are the only collars that we have. We don't have them out, but we have that VHF collar from Wyoming. We have their frequency and we can track that wolf. So I think with that, I'll go ahead and wrap up the wolf discussion unless there's any questions. I think the voters have spoken, and we have the mission and the responsibility to restore wolves to Colorado, and we're going to do that, and we're going to do that the best way that we can. And I think that if you think about it, we're getting pushed from different groups to expedite the process and have wolves on the ground sooner than December of 2023. And we're also getting pushed from other factions and groups that we need to take our time and do it right and make sure we have a robust process. And I think we have one opportunity to do this right. And so my feeling is that we're going to take the time that we need to develop the best process that we can and bring these animals in right. I don't know how many animals that we're talking about. We haven't got to that level of detail yet. We haven't gotten to the level of detail about exactly where they're going to be. We haven't gotten to the level of detail about what that management plan is actually going to look like, and that's what this next couple of years of process is going to help us determine. And we will definitely be keeping you apprised of the status. You will hear updates at the further commission meetings, and look forward to the process, actually, because I think we're going to do a great job with this wolf reintroduction, and hopefully they will be another species on the ground in 15 years that we manage accordingly, and we'll be able to have that additional species out there. So any questions, just throw a chat up there or let us know.
I think you may have addressed this already, Mark, but how is progress on stakeholder involvement group application process coming along? And I think we're not there yet, is what I heard in your answer. We're working on setting it up. Right.
We're getting that process set up. Reed is actually in charge of that process internally, and I don't have the latest and greatest updates on that, but I'm sure that when we get to the point where we're taking applications and public interest, we'll be reaching out to folks, and people will be aware of that process.
Great. And is there any real data, not anecdotal, about more than 4 sibling wolves and what age those sibling wolves are?
Short answer, no. We've seen some animals. Obviously, we've been flying. We've done a lot of surveys, and we documented internally one pup that one of our biologists had seen up there on their personal time, but that's the only reproduction that we've documented in the division, and we never put our hands on that animal. So it was just a visual sighting. So as for the sex and age of the animals up there, we don't know at this point. We don't have that composition because we haven't had our hands on them.
And we did have a question I'll answer of why does CPW tolerate misinformation and poaching talk about wolves on CPW's social media? And we don't have the statewide social media folks on the call tonight, and I can't speak specifically to what those comments are, but we do try to monitor our social media and you know, I guess I can't really speak to it. I don't know if anybody else can.
Well, I'll speak briefly. I may not have the exact answer for you, but between kind of the marketing staff and the communications public information officer staff, we kind of all team up on the social media efforts, and we do try to do monitor the comments that go on through there. And the comments can be very good questions, or they can be sometimes offensive. And they can be comments on subjects that the post doesn't even deal with. So it's, we try to go through and hide maybe comments that are offensive. And we do have policies of what can be tolerated as far as language, and obscenities and things of that nature. So I don't have the exact information probably for you to address that, but I do want people to know that we do try to monitor our comments. On Facebook in particular, we get high volume of generic questions that come in there. It's almost turned into a little bit like our call centers, where people are turning to social media for asking us questions. So we are following it, and we are also in the process of bringing on our lead social media person for the agency.
Thanks, Jason. And I wanted to add, Jody she's not a panelist, but she is messaging me and saying that they in the policy and planning unit are developing an application for that wolf stakeholder group. And once it gets announced, it'll be posted online and promoted via our e-news and email list. So if, get on our email list if you're interested in hearing more about that, or just following the progress of that, and more to come. So, okay, well, thank you, Mark. And we will go, we've got about 15 minutes left. And so, we do have our delegates here for the roundtable. And so if you want to ask questions specifically to them, or talk about issues that are important to you, that you'd like them to bring up at the roundtable or find out more about. There is also, I will put in the chat as soon as I'm done talking, a link to the Sportsperson's Roundtable website, so that you can go there and get email addresses if you'd like to contact them directly or find out more about what the roundtable is about. And I lost Steve's question from the beginning of the meeting because I got booted off temporarily. But I will say we did have preference points on the agenda, Steve, and as you're well aware, that's a very large topic. And we decided, as you can see, we only have 15 minutes left really to have people ask questions that aren't related to stuff that was on the agenda. And we just decided that we didn't have the time to really address that. And so I'll say that, if folks have questions about preference points, staff, this is the time of year applications are about ready to, we're going to start accepting applications in about a month. We're going to have the big game brochure out here in a couple weeks, and we're ready to help you with your preference point questions that are specific to what you've got going on. As far as the bigger picture, you were asking some questions too about resident, non-resident allocation, which is a little different than preference points, and the commission is actively working on that and trying to prioritize that with all the other issues that we have going on to address that hopefully in the near future. And so I think that's where that is at. Oh, good. So you got it back up. And so Steve, I don't know if you've got anything else that I can answer on that just for right now, but I did want to acknowledge that it was on the initial list of topics we were going to discuss, and we just for the sake of time removed it. Not that it's not an important topic, it's just hard to fit in when you've got lots to talk about.
And I would like to add, Kristen, that you know, these issues that are being brought up about preference points and allocation, the commission talked about allocation as well. These are hugely complicated issues that have social, financial, management application and implications. And so the commission, you know, for them to dive into these processes is really, you know, their purview, whether they want to do that or not. And I want to say that any member of the public, and I'm sure the commissioners on here would agree, that any member of the public has an open door to bring, you know, an issue paper forward. We have that process that the issue papers go through the agency generally, and then through the commission if they make it through our agency vetting process, or you can ask to address the commission directly at a meeting with your concerns. And I think, you know, it's an open process, it's an open discussion, and I would encourage people that have issues that they want to have looked at to come forward and talk to the commission about it and utilize that process, because commissioners are very engaged and very much aware of what's going on with the agency and with the public. And so anyway, I wanted to just mention that.
Thanks, Mark. And we did have one question going back to the State Wildlife Area Pass. Is any pass license requirement being enforced now through July 1st?
Right now, what we've been doing is if we contact somebody and they don't have a hunting or fishing license, we've been informing them about what the process is and asking them to go get a license. So that's been it's been part of the educational effort, trying to let folks know about this. So that's what we've been doing right now.
And thank you, Mark, I appreciate that. I mean, our direction was that, you know, and we do this with new regulations quite a bit in the agency. When we have a new regulation, we use education to let people know what's going on and you know, and try to use discretion out there in the field. If we have somebody that's abusing it and there are multiple, you know, times of them coming in and not buying a license, then, you know, maybe a ticket would be appropriate in prosecution at that point. But on a first contact, we're warning people and advising people. We've had complaints come to the commission from our officers in parking lots on our state wildlife areas, handing out brochures and doing education work for the public. So people complained because, you know, basically I guess we're harassing them. I'm not sure, but so we'll continue to do that education work and work through this process. We have to have the public buy-in for these processes, and we want to be reasonable about it as we go through them.
Great. Okay. We did have one comment that maybe fishing licenses are up due to the state wildlife area license requirement. And yep, that could be true. Let's see, any plans for recreation at the new reservoir east of Greeley off of Highway 34? Jason or Jeff?
I'm not sure, 100% sure which reservoir it is. There is a new reservoir that's about 2 years old by Centennial that's owned by United Water and Sanitation. And that's the only one I can think of at 34 and 69, if that's what they're talking about. And it's a privately owned by United Water and Sanitation. It's a lined reservoir that they drain down completely, and I believe it's to feed Cherry Creek water, but I'm not 100% sure. So that's if that's reservoir they're referring to, then yeah, right, as of right now, with just how that is set up and who owns it, there aren't any plans for recreation.
Yeah, and I would agree with Jason. That's the only one I can think of that's in that proximity, and we don't have any plans right now in our database to move fish in that direction. So unless we can get some clarity on exactly what reservoir or the name, maybe offline we can chat with the people or the person bringing up the question. But I agree with you 100%. At this point, no plans.
Okay.
Okay. Had a lot of thank you in the questions. Appreciate that. Oh, my noisy phone. Any other comments or questions? I am posting the link to the roundtable website, or at least I'm trying. There it goes. If you want more information on the roundtable or how to communicate with your delegates. How about the status of Frank Pond's state wildlife area?
Jump in there, Jason Surface.
So in terms of the status, in terms of, I guess, I guess I'm wondering what exactly it is, the status they're looking for. I mean, as of that might help in me.
Reopening, it sounds like, Jason.
Say that again.
He was asking for a reopening.
Oh, for Frank Ponds, so the ponds are under, depending on which ponds they're talking about, the ponds are under we have an easement on the property, so we don't own Frank in fee title. So there's an easement on the property, and within that easement agreement, some of those ponds are for the, I'm trying to remember the name of the company. If it's Burnco, I believe might be the name of the company. But anyway, we don't actually own that fee title. So there's an easement agreement that does enable for some of the closures on those ponds. Now that I believe I know which ponds you're talking about. So that's the only reason why there's a closure on them. So as of right now, because of the language of the easement agreement and the expansion that those ponds have on the boundaries of the property, we're not able to open those right now. Again, it's just because of the language of the easement, since we don't own that outright fee title. I hope that answered the question.
Thank you, Jason. We had a email question sent in, kind of a two-part question from Steve Beach. And Steve, thank you for being on with us tonight. Chris and Mark, or I guess any of the AWMs might be able to address this. It's a two-part question that kind of has to deal with fair chase. So the first part of that is, are there any plans within CPW to restrict the use of game cameras, especially the cell phone connected version? States that multiple states have implemented rules to govern their use, and wants to know about Colorado.
We've had some conversations about this issue because it is, technology is impacting all aspects of hunting and fishing and outdoor recreation, as you can imagine. So as more people are connected to their phones and utilizing technology and the equipment to hunt and fish, we're having to we're playing catch up on every one of these issues. And so, Steve, it's a good question. We've had discussions with the Forest Service, other public land management agencies about that kind of issue. And I think your email mentioned the selling of information. Maybe that's the second part that Jason was going to get to.
Correct.
People selling that information online for location data and that kind of thing. And so we have not developed a policy on that one yet. And I don't think the commission's really taken a hard look at it yet. But we're open to having those discussions. We're just, it's with all these issues, as I mentioned, I don't want to be redundant, but we're behind the technology curve every time, and we're always being responsive. So I think it really, we should probably at some point in the future address this, but we haven't taken stance to prohibit it at this point, and it's not entirely within CPW's purview to do so, I don't believe.
Thank you, Mark.
Okay. Shannon wanted to take a minute to talk about CWD video. So I'm going to give her the floor, and everybody, if there's any last minute questions you'd like to ask, fire away, and otherwise we'll let Shannon take it.
Thanks, Kristen. I just wanted to let everyone know that CPW was awarded a grant to put together a video on CWD, and the video is titled Seeing is Believing. And we've contracted with a professional film crew to really tell the story of CWD and what it looks like on the ground, right? There are landowners that see positive deer in their fields, and then there are landowners that don't, or hunters who have had CWD positive deer and hunters that don't. And so we've taken on this task of really putting together some different images and footage to tell the story of what it does look like on the landscape and what people's feelings are about CWD and the management challenges to addressing it. And one part of that is to recruit landowners and outfitters to work in these focus groups, because we would like to get a deeper understanding of kind of the sentiment towards CWDs, because working with landowners is such a huge part of CWD management for us. So if you are a landowner that is interested in being in a focus group, to let us know kind of what your thoughts are on whether you do allow access for hunting or you don't, or you allow limited access, or you're an outfitter out there who has CWD on your mind and you'd like to help us understand what your ideas are, we'd love to have you participate. And what I would tell you is get a hold of your local DWM if you would like to be in these focus groups and be a part of helping us put together this video and really telling a story of CWD and the management in Colorado. So get a hold of your local DWM, and it's swiftly moving. We're looking at doing this the end of February, beginning of March. So if you have an interest, we'd love to have you, and contact your local DWM. Thank you.
Kristen, could we see if Emily and Cassie and Brian have anything that they want to bring to the table, or at least mention, or an update? I want to let the group know that the commissioners are invited to these calls, and I think many of them listen in. That there's been several of them on the call tonight, and so it's really important for them to be able to hear what your thoughts are as a public and as our representatives on these groups, and so then they can be informed about what things are going on out there on the ground and what people are thinking. So Emily or Cassie or Brian, do you have anything you'd like to add?
This is Brian. I don't. I mean, the issues that I talked to constituents on the field and brought to the table, we've already addressed here. Shannon and Pepper addressed those already.
Thank you, Brian. Cassie did type in one here for us. I guess I could read off. She was just asking if anyone can comment on CPW policy for addressing scope and magnitude of non-motorized mountain bike trails on wildlife habitat. She says, as increasing requests and grant applications for user groups to implement new trails, is CPW planning to update the policy on analyzing wildlife impact?
Well, that's a huge ball of wax right there, and something that we're dealing with as an agency all the time. We're in the process right now reviewing OHV and non-motorized grants, and Scott actually oversees our trails program in the Northeast region and does a great job of working on that. We are updating our management plans and the impacts, and we're utilizing some federal dollars and state dollars to do some research studies. Steamboat area is one of them. We are involved in several stakeholder processes and working on groups on the ground. NOCO Places is one of them that kind of got started up here in the Northeast region to look at impacts to lands and wildlife. Actually, we're at the table on the wildlife portion and the recreation portion. And Director Prenslow has started an initiative called Regional Recreation Roundtables, and we will be meeting. We'll be developing that roundtable here in the Northeast region. We're not there quite yet, and I think those will be very helpful in planning for development. Our field staff right now are meeting with our public land partners like the Forest Service, especially in the Northeast region here, to look at work that's going on this summer in the coming year, and also to plan for mapping and inventories of critical areas to avoid those during trail processes. The Forest Service invites us at the table and wants our input on those planning processes. So we are continually working on that. I sit on as an advisor to the State Trails Committee on wildlife issues, and so our wildlife officers and biologists statewide provide comments on projected projects that, like I said, non-motorized and OHV projects across the state. We're seeing a huge increase in the number of projects. The Trails Committee, especially on the OHV side, has been putting more money into maintenance of the existing trails to deal with erosional issues. And so I think that's a great step in the right direction. But we are the State Trails Committee, OHV, and the non-motorized subcommittees are taking a much more impactful look on wildlife impacts on those projects. And we've actually had some that have gone down the road and they haven't funded because of that. So, Scott, do you want to add anything to that before we get to Emily?
The only thing that I'd add is there is a document that's planning trails with wildlife in mind that is going on right now as an internal review with the CBW folks, and that'll be coming out soon, and that'll be an updated version as a planning document for other agencies to use as well as ourselves.
Thank you. Emily, I think you unmuted yourself and you were going to chime in there.
Thanks, Mark. I just want to thank CPW staff and the public for their engagement tonight, and look forward to taking today's conversation back to the statewide roundtable here in a couple weeks. And also want to recognize all the commissioners that joined us tonight as well.
Thank you. Well, Kristen, I think that kind of concludes our agenda, doesn't it? I didn't mean to jump on you there. I apologize, but I want to thank everybody for taking time out of your day to meet with us tonight and hear what we've got going on and provide some feedback to the issues. I also want to thank the commissioners that jump on. They are hugely important to our agency and to the public, and we so much appreciate their work and involvement in our issues. If you jump on a commission meeting, virtually or otherwise, you will see what the magnitude and complexity of the issues are that we deal with as an agency and as a commission. And I think you will really appreciate all the work that goes into this. We don't make decisions lightly and recommendations to the commission lightly. And this is a huge part of interfacing with the public. I want to thank all the staff that are on the call tonight. Thank you all for the updates and the great presentations and the work. Kristen, thank you for moderating it.